The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the barren landscape. A small, rugged ranch sat on the outskirts of a dusty town, its wooden fence weathered by years of harsh winds and the unforgiving desert sun. The dry earth cracked beneath the weight of time, and the horizon stretched far beyond, blending the colors of orange and purple as the day slipped into dusk. John Blackwell, the rancher, stood at the fence, his hands rough from years of labor. His slow, deliberate movements reflected the weight of a man who had seen much in his life. The fence needed repairs, and John was determined to fix it himself, as he had done many times before. His face was deeply etched with the lines of a hard life, eyes set in a quiet, reflective gaze. He was a man of few words, a man who preferred the solitude of his ranch to the chaos of town life. But that evening, the calm was shattered. A small figure appeared at the edge of the ranch, staggering toward him. It was a boy no older than 12, his clothes ragged and dirt-streaked, his eyes wide with fear. The boy looked like he had run a long way, his breath ragged and his body trembling. As he neared, John put down his tools, sensing something was wrong. The boy stopped in front of him, looking up with desperation in his eyes. Tears welled up in the boy's eyes as he spoke, his voice cracking. "Please, mister, you've got to help me. They're hurting my family." His words tumbled out in a rush. "The men, they came, they stole our cattle. They're going to kill us if we don't do what they say. Please, you've got to stop them." John stood silently, absorbing the boy's frantic plea. He hadn't asked for trouble, and yet here it was, knocking at his door. The boy's family was being tormented by a ruthless group of men, and their leader, a man named Tobin Griggs, had terrorized the region for far too long. John's mind raced as he processed the boy's words. The cattle theft, the threats, the violence. He had heard of Griggs and his men, but he never imagined they would come this far. John looked down at the boy, who was still shaking. His heart softened for a moment, but then the weight of his past settled back into his chest. He had turned away from violence long ago, choosing a quiet life on the ranch. But here was again, knocking at his door, reminding him of what he had once been. As John stared at the boy, memories from his past began to surface. A flashback took him back to a time when he had been a lawman, respected and feared. He had worn a badge and carried a gun, serving the law with a quick hand and a strong moral code. He had been fast with his gun and sharp with his mind, solving crimes and stopping bad men before they could do any harm. But that life had come to an end in a violent tragedy. John's wife and children had been taken from him, killed in a senseless act of revenge by men he had once pursued. The loss of his family had broken something inside him, and he had sworn never to pick up a gun again. The grief, the pain, it was too much. And so he had walked away from the life he knew, choosing instead to work the land in silence, away from the violence and chaos of his past. Now, standing in front of the boy, John felt the stirring of something he hadn't felt in years, the call of justice. But the cost of that justice was high, and John was not sure he was ready to pay it again. The boy's plea echoed in his mind. This wasn't just about cattle or money. It was about lives. The boy's family was in danger, and if John didn't act, they could be next. The boy wiped his tear-streaked face and looked up at John, pleading. "I can't do this alone, mister. Please, you're the only one who can stop them. My family, they're all I have left. I don't want to lose them too." John looked at the boy, his heart heavy with the weight of his decision. He didn't want to get involved. He had sworn to leave the past behind, to live a life of peace. But the boy's sincerity, his raw desperation, stirred something deep within him. John's past as a lawman flashed before his eyes, and the sense of justice he had once fought for flickered, if only for a moment. John exhaled slowly and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I can't promise you anything," he said, his voice rough but steady. "But I'll do what I can. If your family's in danger, I'll help you. But understand, this isn't going to be easy. There's a price to pay for this, and it's not one I can avoid." The boy's face lit up with relief. "Thank you. Thank you, sir," he cried, his voice trembling with gratitude. John turned and began to prepare. He walked to the shed, his movements slow but purposeful. He opened the door and retrieved his old rifle, its weight familiar in his hands. The rifle had been with him through many battles, both physical and emotional, and now it would be part of his journey once more. He checked the ammunition, loading it carefully. He didn't want to take chances. As John readied himself, the boy watched, his eyes full of hope. "What now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. John looked at him, his face hardening with resolve. "We leave tonight. We'll head to where these men are, and we'll put an end to this." His words were measured, calm, but there was no mistaking the intensity behind them. "You stay close. Don't make a sound, and we'll get through this together." The boy nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He had no illusions about what was to come. His family's safety depended on John, and he knew the risks. But for the first time in a long while, the boy felt a spark of hope. As John mounted his horse, the boy climbed up behind him. They rode off into the night, the desert stretching endlessly before them. The wind howled, and the darkness seemed to swallow them whole. But John's mind was focused, and the boy, though frightened, was determined. They were on a mission, one that would test both of them in ways they couldn't yet understand. The quiet rancher had made his decision. He wasn't just going to help the boy. He was going to end the suffering. He had lived through enough loss, and he wasn't going to let this family face the same fate. It was time for him to confront his past and face the demons he had buried so long ago. And this time, he wouldn't walk away. As they rode into the night, John Blackwell knew that whatever awaited them, it was a fight they would have to face together. And for the first time in years, he felt something stir within him, a sense of purpose that had been lost, but now was found again. The morning sun had barely risen when John Blackwell began preparing for the journey ahead. The quiet ranch was still and silent, with only the sound of the wind whispering through the dry grass. John moved with purpose, gathering his supplies as the boy, whose name was now revealed to be Sam, watched quietly. John packed ammunition, water, and his old maps, taking care to ensure everything was in order. He worked quickly, but there was no rushing. Every movement was deliberate, honed over years of experience. As John worked, he explained the importance of patience and stealth. "We're not going in guns blazing," he told Sam, his voice steady. "We're going in quiet. We wait for the right moment. Too many mistakes, and we risk losing everything." Sam listened intently, his eyes wide, eager for every word. John's plan was simple, but it required precision. They would ride through the desert under the cover of night, traveling the rocky paths to reach the hideout of the men who had been terrorizing Sam's family. As John tightened the straps on his saddlebag, Sam's eyes shifted toward the ground. The weight of what was coming had begun to settle on his shoulders. The rancher's calmness only seemed to amplify his own fear. The boy shifted nervously, biting his lip. Finally, he spoke in a quiet voice. "My mom, she's sick. We couldn't afford the medicine. The men, they said they'd hurt her more if we didn't give them the cattle." His voice cracked as he spoke. "They've hurt us so many times, but I can't let them do it anymore. My dad says we're stuck because of them." John paused, his hand resting on his rifle. His heart tightened at the boy's words. His gaze softened for a brief moment. He had heard about men like this, ruthless, willing to destroy others for their own gain. But hearing the desperation in Sam's voice made it real. This wasn't just about cattle. This was about survival. John cleared his throat and said, "We'll get them back. We'll stop them. But we need to be smart. We can't make noise. We can't let them know we're coming." The boy nodded, his determination growing stronger. The weight of his family's suffering pressed down on him like a stone, but John's words gave him hope. The rancher, despite his gruff exterior, had agreed to help. Sam felt a small flicker of trust beginning to form. He had no one else to turn to. This man was his only chance. John finished packing and motioned for Sam to follow him. Get your things. It's time to go. As they journeyed through the desert, the sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the barren land. The air was hot and dry, a constant reminder of how harsh the desert could be. The path was difficult, winding through rocks and sand, with not a soul in sight for miles. The only sound was the rhythmic thud of hooves against the dry earth. Sam, riding behind John on the horse, couldn't help but look around, his eyes wide with wonder. He had never ventured this far before. The desert was a world unlike any he had known, with its harsh beauty and silent vastness. As they moved further into the wilderness, Sam's curiosity began to grow. His mind, though full of fear, also sought understanding. He had so many questions, and John was the only one who could answer them. "Mr. Blackwell," Sam asked tentatively, "what was it like when you were a lawman?" He had heard stories from the town about John's past, about the quick hands and sharp mind that had once made him a feared figure in the region. But John had never spoken about it, and Sam had always wondered. John's face remained stoic, his eyes on the trail ahead. He had always kept his past buried, away from the world and away from others. "Doesn't matter now," John replied shortly, his voice low. "That man is long gone." Sam didn't press the matter, sensing that it was a subject John didn't want to revisit. Instead, he looked ahead, his hands gripping the reins tightly as the terrain grew more difficult. The boy's curiosity remained, but his thoughts were overtaken by the ever-present tension of the journey. They rode on in silence for a while, the weight of the desert pressing down on them both. The journey was taking its toll on Sam, his body tired and sore from the rough ride. But it was the fear of the unknown that gnawed at him the most. They were headed toward the men who had been terrorizing his family, and he wasn't sure what to expect when they arrived. As they continued on, Sam spoke again, his voice tinged with doubt. "Do you think we can actually stop them? I mean, they've got so many men, and they're all so mean." His words trailed off as he looked up at John, searching for reassurance. John's gaze never left the horizon. "We'll do what we can," he said calmly. "You've got to trust me, Sam. We're doing this one step at a time. We'll stay quiet, stay hidden, and when the time comes, we act." But even as he said the words, John wasn't so sure himself. His years of experience in the wild had taught him to be cautious, and now, as they ventured deeper into hostile territory, he could feel the weight of the situation. The odds weren't in their favor. The desert was beginning to feel like a living thing, its silence pressing in on them, swallowing up every sound. As night fell and the stars began to twinkle overhead, the air grew colder, but the tension between them remained. Just as John had feared, they were nearing the hideout of the men who had been terrorizing Sam's family. John could feel in his bones something was wrong. As they approached a dry creek bed, John's sharp eyes caught the first signs of their enemy's presence. Broken branches, fresh footprints in the sand. They had been here recently. The realization hit John like a slap. They weren't alone anymore. Sam, looking around nervously, asked in a low voice, "What now?" John motioned for him to be quiet. "Stay close, Sam. Don't make a sound. We're getting close." His mind raced as he formulated his next move. They had to move fast, and they had to move smart. If they were going to survive this, they couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The boy's fate, and perhaps his own, depended on it. As they continued their approach, the tension between them grew. Sam was both excited and terrified, caught between the hope of saving his family and the reality of the danger they were about to face. The silence of the desert seemed to stretch endlessly before them as they crept closer to the hideout. John's plan was simple but dangerous. They would infiltrate the hideout at night, using the cover of darkness to their advantage. But as the night grew deeper and the men's presence grew clearer, John knew they were getting closer to a deadly confrontation. John Blackwell's boots crunched softly against the dry earth as he and Sam neared the hideout. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting a faint glow on the desert landscape. It had been a long, tense ride through the night, But now, they were here, at the heart of the conflict. The hideout lay ahead, a small camp of rough men nestled in a hidden ravine. From this vantage point, John could see the camp clearly, a fire still smoldering, tents scattered about, and a handful of men moving lazily around the camp. John's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the scene. He had seen enough of these camps in his past to know what he was looking for: guards, escape routes, weak spots. His mind clicked into action, analyzing every detail, every movement. 6 of them, he muttered quietly to himself, his voice barely a whisper. And Griggs is probably the one by the fire. He turned to Sam, his face serious. "You stay here," he instructed, his voice firm yet calm. "Don't make a sound. I'll come back for you." Sam nodded reluctantly, his eyes wide with worry, but he didn't argue. John had always been a man of few words, and even fewer promises, but the boy trusted him now. He had no choice. As Sam found a place behind a rock to crouch down, hidden from view, John set off toward camp. His movements were fluid, practiced, like a shadow slipping through the cracks of the world. He moved silently, his every step calculated, his every breath measured. Years of experience, both as a lawman and a rancher, had made him proficient at this: stealth, patience, precision. He observed the layout of the camp as he crept closer. There were 2 guards standing watch, one by the fire and another by a tent near the back. The rest of the men were asleep, scattered around the camp. One of them snored loudly, his gun resting beside him. Tobin Griggs, the leader, was sitting by the fire, a mug in hand, his back to John. The man didn't even realize the danger creeping toward him. John waited, observing for several long moments, then made his move. He slipped past the guards with ease, silently eliminating them one by one, making sure not to alert the others. His old instincts kicked in, and within minutes, he had disabled the first guard without a sound. The second guard never even saw him coming, his last breath stolen in an instant. As he moved through the camp, John's heart beat steadily, his mind sharp. He could feel the tension rising, knowing that the boy was watching him from the shadows. John had promised to return for Sam, but the stakes were too high. He had to make sure this confrontation was swift, clean, and most importantly, quiet. He wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. He was fighting to protect a life, a future, and the family the boy had left. John could feel the moment drawing closer. The time for reconnaissance was over. The camp was quiet, the men still unaware of the danger. But the moment he had waited for arrived, the time to strike. John moved quickly, his rifle now in his hand. The weapon was an extension of him, familiar and comforting in its weight. With a swift motion, John disabled the final sentry near the fire, bringing him down silently, his body crumpling to the ground with hardly a sound. The time had come to confront Griggs and his men. John's eyes locked onto the leader, Tobin Griggs, who was still sitting by the fire, completely unaware of the danger closing in around him. John moved like a predator, his rifle raised and steady. Without hesitation, he fired, his shot taking out the man closest to Griggs. The camp erupted into chaos. Griggs shot up, his eyes widening in shock as he shouted for his men to fight back. The remaining men scrambled for their weapons, but they were too slow. From his hiding spot, Sam watched in awe and terror. His heart pounded in his chest as he saw John moving with a precision that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. Every shot fired, every movement seemed deliberate, calculated, almost effortless. John was in complete control, dispatching the men one by one, his actions so swift that it was over before Sam even had a chance to fully comprehend it. The boy's stomach churned with a mixture of fear and awe. He had never seen anything like this before. He had seen men fight in town, but not like this, not with such cold efficiency. John was a force of nature, and Sam couldn't help but feel both grateful and terrified. Griggs and his men were formidable, but John was a man with a purpose, and that purpose was clear now: to stop these men from destroying his life and the boys. Tobin Griggs, now enraged and desperate, gathered his remaining men. His voice was loud and furious, rallying his crew to fight back. "Get him!" he yelled, his voice cracking with anger. "Don't let him take us down one by one." The conflict that had been building up for days finally exploded into a full-scale battle. Gunfire rang out, sharp and quick, as the men scrambled to protect themselves and retaliate. John, however, was already in motion, darting from cover to cover, his rifle barking in short, controlled bursts. One by one, the remaining outlaws fell, their resistance crumbling beneath the ranchers' unyielding focus. Sam's heart raced as he watched the scene unfold, his stomach turning with each shot that rang out. The boy had never imagined it would be like this. The fight, the violence, the skill, it was like something out of a story, something he couldn't fully grasp. But as he watched John, calm and unflinching, dispatch the men with lethal precision, Sam realized just how much was at stake. These men were not just hurting his family. They were willing to destroy everything, and John was the only one standing between them and victory. The gunfire was deafening, the air thick with tension. John moved swiftly, taking out the last of the men as Griggs tried to regroup. The outlaw leader was furious, his eyes wild with rage. He had underestimated John, had thought him an old man, a relic of a past life. But now, faced with the reality of the confrontation, Griggs realized his mistake. Griggs, desperate, raised his own weapon to fire at John, but the rancher was quicker. A single shot rang out, and Griggs crumpled to the ground, his gun slipping from his hand. The battle was over. The silence that followed was deafening. Sam's heart was still racing in his chest, his hands shaking. The boy felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, fear, awe, but above all, gratitude. John had done it. He had protected him, and he had protected his family. John stood still, surveying the aftermath of the battle. His chest heaved with the effort, his eyes scanning the camp for any last signs of movement. It was over, but John knew this was only the beginning. There was still much to be done. He turned to Sam, who was still watching from the shadows. The boy's wide eyes met his, filled with a mixture of admiration and fear. John nodded once, his face stern but proud. "We're not done yet," he said quietly. "But we've made a start." Sam nodded, his chest still tight with the emotions of the moment. He didn't fully understand everything that had just happened, but he knew one thing for sure: John had saved them. The air was thick with tension as John Blackwell and Tobin Griggs faced each other, the battlefield around them littered with fallen men. The sounds of gunfire had faded, but the weight of the moment remained heavy in the air. Griggs, wounded but still full of fight, glared at John with hatred in his eyes. The two men were evenly matched. Griggs had the strength of a seasoned outlaw, but John had the experience, the calm, and the determination to finish this once and for all. John moved first, his eyes locked on Griggs as he advanced. His body was a coil of tension, every step deliberate, his hand steady on his rifle. Griggs reacted quickly, firing a shot that barely missed John's head. The bullet whizzed past, kicking up dust as John ducked to the side. He knew this would be a close fight. Griggs was desperate, and when a man was desperate, he was dangerous. The two men circled each other, each waiting for the other to make a move. Griggs lunged, swinging his rifle like a club. John blocked it, using his strength to shove Griggs back, but the outlaw came at him again, this time with a wild, ferocious swing. John sidestepped, his own rifle raised, and with one swift motion, he knocked Griggs off balance, sending him stumbling into a pile of rocks. For a moment, both men paused, breathing heavily, the fight at a standstill. John's heart pounded in his chest, the years of violence he had left behind resurfacing in the heat of the moment. But he didn't let it take over. He had one goal: to stop Griggs and end this reign of terror once and for all. The boy, watching from behind a boulder, was shaking. His heart raced as he saw the two men locked in a brutal struggle. Sam had always heard stories of violence, but had never witnessed it up close. His stomach churned as he saw Griggs swing wildly and John counter with calm precision. But as the fight escalated, Sam couldn't stay hidden anymore. He had watched John fight off the other men, and now he realized that he had a part to play in this. The boy gripped his rifle tightly, his fingers trembling as he stepped from his hiding place. "John!" Sam called out, his voice shaky but determined. John glanced over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing with concern, but the boy had already taken aim. With a shaky breath, Sam fired. The sound of the shot rang out, and one of Griggs' men, who had been sneaking up on John, collapsed to the ground, knocked out cold. The moment of surprise gave John the upper hand. With Griggs distracted, John surged forward, his strength pushing the outlaw back. Griggs fought to regain control, but his movements were slower now, his desperation evident. John took advantage of his momentary weakness and, with a final, powerful blow, disarmed Griggs, knocking him to the ground. John stood over him, breathing heavily, his rifle still raised, but he hesitated. Griggs was defeated, but John couldn't bring himself to end the man's life. Instead, he kicked the outlaw's gun away and took a deep breath. "You're done, Griggs," John said, his voice low and firm. "You'll face the law now." Griggs groaned, glaring up at John with hatred. "You think the law will stop me? You think they can hold me for long?" He spat, his words full of venom. John didn't respond. He didn't need to. He turned to the rest of Griggs' men, who were now surrendering or fleeing, realizing that the fight was lost. The camp was overrun. John had won, but it wasn't a victory that felt good. It was a victory that came with a heavy weight, a weight that only violence could bring. The desert was still, the sun beginning to set as John stood over the wreckage of the camp. The sounds of surrender and retreat echoed in the distance, but there was a silence between John and Sam that hung in the air. Sam watched John carefully, the man who had just saved his family, but who had also just fought with brutal precision. The boy had seen violence before, but never like this, never with so much skill and so much purpose. John was silent, his eyes distant as he stared at the defeated Griggs, who was now bound and waiting for the authorities to arrive. The fight was over, but the toll it had taken on John was obvious. He had spent years running from violence, swearing it off after the loss of his own family. But now, here he was, in the middle of it again, facing the consequences of his decisions. John sat down on a nearby rock, his hand resting on the rifle, and took a deep breath. The weight of the past seemed to press in on him, and for the first time in a long while, he wondered if he had made the right choice. He had acted out of necessity, of course, but was that enough? Was it enough to justify the bloodshed, the violence, the fear that came with it? He glanced at Sam, who was sitting nearby, still in shock from the battle. The boy had never been in the midst of such a violent confrontation, and now he had seen the cost of it. Sam was no longer the wide-eyed child who had begged for help. He was now a boy who understood that violence wasn't a simple solution. It had its own price. "Are you okay, Sam?" John asked quietly, his voice soft but full of concern. Sam nodded, though his eyes were haunted. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice lacked the certainty it had before the fight. He wasn't fine. He couldn't be. Not after everything he had witnessed. "Thank you, John. You saved my family." John gave a slight nod, his eyes dark. "I did what I had to do, but don't think it comes without a price. Violence always leaves something behind." His voice trailed off, as if he was speaking more to himself than to the boy. Sam looked up at John, his eyes serious. "I understand," he said quietly, though his words carried more weight than his years should have allowed. He had seen the violence, felt the tension, and now he understood that it was a choice that could never be taken lightly. John looked back at Griggs, his mind still processing the aftermath of the battle. "You're not the same boy you were before, Sam. You've seen what it takes to protect the people you love, and you've seen the cost. His voice was low, almost pained. "It's a lesson you'll carry with you for the rest of your life." Sam nodded again, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. He wasn't sure if he was ready for that lesson. But as he looked at John, this man who had given everything for a chance at redemption, he realized that he had no choice. This was the world they lived in now. As the night fell and the desert grew still around them, John and Sam sat in silence, both lost in their thoughts. They had won the battle, but the war, whatever that war was far from over. And for the first time, Sam understood the true cost of fighting for what you believed in. John had saved him. He had saved his family. But in doing so, he had also given Sam a new kind of burden. The burden of understanding the weight of the world, the cost of violence, and the responsibility that came with it. And that, Sam realized, was the real price of their victory. The sun was setting when John and the boy finally returned to the ranch. It had been a long, hard journey, but the weight of the past seemed to lift as they approached the familiar home. Dust settled behind them as the ranch came into view, and the boy's heart leapt at the sight of his family waiting by the porch. His mother, looking pale but relieved, stood at the front, her eyes scanning the horizon as if searching for the boy. When she finally spotted him, her face broke into a smile that stretched from ear to ear. "Mama," the boy called, his voice cracking as he ran toward her, his legs burning from the long ride, but pushing through anyway. She enveloped him in a tight hug, and the relief in her embrace was enough to heal the pain of the past few days. The boy's siblings rushed to greet him, laughing and shouting his name. The noise was overwhelming, but the boy welcomed it, letting the joy of being home wash over him. His family was whole again. The terror that had plagued them for so long was over. John watched from a distance, standing just beyond the porch, not wanting to intrude on the emotional reunion. He knew he had done what needed to be done, but that didn't mean he wanted to be the center of attention. He had no need for thanks or praise. His reward was in seeing the family safe and together again. The sun cast a warm glow over the scene as he stood there, a quiet observer of the healing that was beginning to take place. As the boy's family turned their focus toward John, gratitude shone in their eyes. The boy's father, still recovering from the ordeal, gave John a grateful nod. "We can't thank you enough, John," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You've saved us all." John gave a slight nod in return, not trusting himself to speak. His throat tightened at the weight of the gratitude, but he refused to let it sway him. His eyes lingered on the boy, who had returned to his side, his face full of awe and thanks. The boy looked up at John, his voice small but sincere. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You saved my family, but more than that, you showed me what it means to protect the people you love." John felt the words settle deeply within him, their meaning reaching a part of him that had long been buried. The boy was no longer just a frightened child. He was a young man who had witnessed the weight of responsibility, the cost of protecting those who mattered. And in those simple words, John realized that despite everything he had lost, he had given something of great value to this boy, something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. As the evening wore on, John quietly stepped back, watching the family reunite and begin to rebuild the pieces of their lives. The boy's mother, despite her illness, started to feel the stirrings of hope. The ranch was still in disarray, but the feeling of peace had returned. The tension of the past months was gone, replaced by something stronger, the beginnings of a new life. That night, after the family had settled down, John made his way to the barn, his old home away from home. The moon cast a soft glow over the land, and the air felt cooler than it had in days. He didn't need to be in the house. He needed the silence, the solitude that the barn provided. As he entered, the familiar scent of hay and leather greeted him. It was here that he had spent so many years alone, wrestling with his thoughts, avoiding his past. But tonight was different. For the first time in years, John didn't feel the heavy weight of isolation. His past still lingered, the memories of his lost family, the decisions he had made to keep his distance from the world. But now, in the quiet of the barn, he could feel a sense of peace settling within him. He wasn't running anymore. He heard footsteps behind him, and turning, he saw the boy standing in the doorway, looking hesitant but determined. "John!" The boy's voice was soft, unsure, but there was something in it that made John pause. The boy stepped closer, his hands gripping the edge of his rifle nervously. "I've been thinking," the boy said, his eyes serious. I want to be like you. I want to protect my family, to do what's right. I know it won't be easy, but I want to carry on what you've taught me." John regarded the boy for a long moment, his eyes searching his face. The boy had seen violence, had felt fear, but now he understood something deeper. He understood the responsibility that came with protecting those you loved. It wasn't a responsibility that could be taken lightly. "You've got a good heart, son," John said, his voice gruff but steady. "And you've learned the hardest lesson there is. Protecting the people you love comes with a price, but it's a price worth paying." He paused, his eyes softening. "But remember, it's not about fighting. It's about knowing when to fight and when to walk away." The boy nodded, taking in every word. He wasn't a child anymore. He was beginning to understand the weight of what it meant to stand up for what was right, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. "I promise," the boy said, his voice strong now. "I'll do my best to protect my family, just like you did." John's eyes softened, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "I know you will," he replied. "Just don't forget that you're not alone in this. You got a family here now, and you've got people who'll stand by you when the time comes." The boy smiled, and for the first time since the journey began, he looked truly at peace. As they stood together in the barn, looking out into the night, John realized something he hadn't thought possible. The life he had once left behind, the life of connection, of purpose, was still within his reach. He had found it again, not in the past, but in the present, in the boy who had shown him that redemption was possible. They didn't need to run anymore. They didn't need to hide from the world. Together, they had found something worth fighting for. John looked over at the boy, who was now standing at his side, looking up at the stars above. They had both learned something valuable on this journey, something that would carry them forward. "We've got a future ahead of us," John murmured. Together, and as they stood there, side by side, the horizon stretched before them, full of promise. They would face it together, whatever it brought. The ranch had flourished over the years, the once barren land, now rich with life. John, though older, had watched it all with quiet pride. The boy, now a young man named Sam, had taken the reins of the ranch. His calm demeanor and steady hands were a reflection of the lessons John had taught him. Sam had passed those lessons on to his siblings, ensuring the values of protection, courage, and selflessness continued. John watched from the porch, seeing the ranch not just as a piece of land, but as a living testament to the bond they had formed. Sam now led with the same quiet strength John once had, and the ranch thrived under his guidance. As John sat, reflecting on his journey, he realized that he had become more than just a rancher. He had built a legacy rooted in family, honor, and community. It was a legacy that would live on through Sam and his family, long after John was gone. As the sun set, John looked up at the horizon, his gaze drawn to the North Star. It had been a constant throughout their journey, a symbol of hope and guidance. Now, it stood as a reminder that the ranch would be in good hands. John knew that Sam would carry on what he had started, and the ranch would endure. The values of honor, family, and protection would continue to guide the next generation. The North Star, shining brightly above, symbolized the peace John felt. He had found what he had been searching for all along: redemption, peace, and a family to share it with. With one last look at the horizon, John walked inside, where Sam and the family were waiting. As they gathered around, John knew that his legacy would live on, not just in the ranch, but in the hearts of those he had fought so hard to protect. The journey was complete, and the future was secure.